At exactly 6:30 a.m., I found a bank transfer that did not make any sense. $41,000, gone from our joint savings account, sent to a company I had never heard of. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my coffee going cold, reading the transaction 3 times before I trusted my own eyes. I called upstairs. Lacey. She came down in her robe, hair still damp from the shower, and I turned the screen toward her without a word. She glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds. "Oh, that. Don't worry about it, Daniel. It's an investment thing. I'll explain later." Later, she said it the way you'd tell a kid you'd explain the movie plot after the popcorn line moved. Casual. Almost bored. I remember thinking that was strange, because $41,000 was not a number either of us treated casually. Not after 18 years of watching every dollar that came in and out of this house. I let it go. That was my first mistake, though I did not know it yet. My name is Daniel Brooks. I am 52 years old, and I run a machine shop outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, the kind of place that makes precision parts for companies in the energy sector. I started it 15 years ago, with 2 second-hand lathes and a business loan that kept me up at night. Now it employs 43 people, and does work for clients across 3 states. I am not a rich man by the standards of the world. I am a man who built something with his hands and his stubbornness, and who has spent most of his adult life believing that if you show up, tell the truth, and do the work, things generally hold together. Lacey and I met at a friend's wedding when she was 23 and I was 34. She was working as a physical therapist then, sharp and funny in a way that made me feel like the slowest talker in every room. We got married the following spring. We have 2 children. One, Sophie, 16, who inherited her mother's stubbornness and my patience for detail. Ethan, 12, who still thinks it is a good idea to follow me into the garage every Saturday and hand me wrenches I have not asked for. On weekends, I restore an old Ford pickup that used to belong to my father. It sits in the garage in pieces most of the time. There is something steady about an engine. You take it apart, you find what is broken, you fix it, and it runs again. I have spent 30 years believing marriage worked the same way. I was about to learn how wrong that assumption could be. That morning, I had a flight to catch. A client in Houston wanted to finalize a supply contract worth close to $2 million over 3 years, and I had been chasing this deal for months. I kissed Lacey goodbye, told her we would talk about the transfer that night, and drove to the airport with my mind already in Houston. The line at the gate moved fast. I handed the agent my card to pay for a seat upgrade. I had not planned but decided I deserved after the morning ID had. She swiped it, waited, swiped it again. "I am sorry, sir. It's showing declined." I felt my face go warm the way it does when a room suddenly has too many eyes in it. The man behind me in line checked his watch. I tried a second card. Declined again. I told the agent I would skip the upgrade, thanked her, and walked to my gate with my jaw tight and my stomach doing something I did not have a name for yet. I called Lacey from the gate. She picked up on the 4th ring. "My cards aren't working," I said. "Both of them." There was a pause. The kind of pause that lasts half a second too long. "I moved some things around this morning," she said. "I'll fix it. I promise. Just use the company card for now." I asked her what she meant by move things around. She said it was complicated, that she would explain everything when I got home, that I should focus on my meeting and not worry about money on a day this important. I have known Lacey long enough to recognize when she is asking me to trust her and when she is asking me to stop asking questions. This felt like the second one. I boarded the flight. I closed the deal in Houston. I shook hands with a man I had been courting for 4 months, and I felt none of the satisfaction I expected to feel. My mind kept circling back to that pause on the phone. I flew home that evening. The house was quiet when I walked in, the kind of quiet that makes you notice small things you would normally miss. Lacey was in the kitchen, and when I came through the door, she closed her laptop a little too quickly and slid it toward the far end of the counter. "How was Houston?" she asked, already moving to hug me, already talking about dinner, already steering the conversation somewhere else. "If we signed," I said. $2 million over 3 years. "That's wonderful, honey." I asked about the transfer again. She sighed, the kind of sigh that carries more performance than feeling, and told me she had been working with a financial advisor for the past several months, someone she met through the yoga studio where she took morning classes. His name was Owen Chandler. She said he specialized in helping families like ours grow their savings beyond what a regular bank account could offer. She said the $41,000 was the second contribution to an account Owen was managing on our behalf, and that the return so far had been, in her words, incredible. I asked why I had never heard his name before that morning. I was going to tell you, she said. I wanted to wait until I had real numbers to show you. I didn't want you to worry about something that might not even work out. It sounded reasonable enough. On the surface, Lacey has always been the one who reads books about compound interest for fun, who spent a year getting us out of credit card debt through sheer discipline when Sophie was a baby. It was not entirely out of character for her to explore something like this. I told myself that. I wanted to believe it. That was my second mistake.
I accepted an explanation that was thin because the alternative felt worse than believing it. Over the next few days, I noticed things I might have dismissed before. A name, Owen C. Appearing twice on the shared family calendar with no details attached. Lacey stepping out to the porch to take a call, then coming back inside with her voice a half step brighter than it had been a moment earlier. A text notification on her phone one evening that she silenced before I could see more than the first 3 words. None of it, on its own, meant anything. That is the strange thing about the beginning of a betrayal. It never arrives as one clear signal. It arrives as a collection of things you could explain away individually, and only look wrong when you finally lay them side by side.
I decided to look at our business bank records myself. The joint accounts I rarely touched because Lacey had always handled the household finances while I handled the shop's books. I told myself I was just being thorough, the way I would be if a supplier's invoice did not add up. I logged into the account late that night after Lacey had gone to sleep. What I found kept me sitting at that kitchen table until almost 2 in the morning. The $41,000 transfer was not the first. There had been 3 smaller transfers before it, going back nearly 7 months. Each one sent to the same recipient, a company called Ock Capital Advisory, small enough on their own that I understood exactly why I had never noticed them before. Together, they added up to just over $68,000. Quietly moved out of accounts I had trusted my wife to manage without needing to check behind her. I searched the company name. I found almost nothing. No website worth mentioning. No public records I recognized. Nothing that looked like the kind of legitimate advisory firm that should be managing that much of our savings. I sat there in the dark kitchen with the blue light of the laptop screen on my hands, and I thought about calling Lacey down right then and putting everything on the table. I thought about waking her up and asking her exactly who Owen Chandler was and why our money had a trail leading straight to him. I did not do that. Instead, I closed the laptop and walked out to the garage, where my father's old truck sat half-assembled under a shop light, waiting for me to finish what I had started months ago. I stood there for a long time, looking at an engine I understood completely, in a house where I was beginning to realize I understood almost nothing at all. I made a decision that night that I could not take back once I made it. I was not going to confront Lacey yet, not until I knew exactly what I was confronting. Somewhere behind that decision was something colder than anger, something closer to the discipline that had built my business from 2 second-hand lathes into something real. If I was going to fix this, I needed to understand every piece of it first. I just did not know yet how many pieces there were, or how far back this had actually started. I did not sleep that night. I lay next to Lacey with my eyes on the ceiling, listening to her breathing settle into the slow rhythm of real sleep, and I thought about the $68,000 sitting in an account with no real name attached to it. By the time the sun came up, I had already made a decision I would not walk back from. I was not going to ask Lacey anything else until I understood exactly what I was looking at.
Marcus Webb had handled every piece of paper my business had ever needed, from the loan that started the shop to the contract I had just signed in Houston. I called his office before 8 and asked if he had time that afternoon. He always made time for me. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. His office sat above a hardware store downtown, the kind of place with worn leather chairs and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. I laid it all out for him: the declined cards, the transfer, the name Owen Chandler, the company that barely existed online. Marcus listened without interrupting, the way he always did, taking notes in handwriting I had never once been able to read. When I finished, he set his pen down. "Don't say anything to her yet," he said. I told him that felt wrong. "She's my wife." "She is," he said.
"And if she believes you don't know anything, she'll keep behaving the way she's been behaving. The moment she thinks you're onto her, everything changes. People get careful. They delete things. They start explaining decisions they've already made instead of making new ones in front of you." I sat with that for a moment. It felt like a strategy built for a stranger, not for a marriage. But some part of me, the part that had spent 15 years reading supplier contracts for the sentence that didn't quite match the rest, understood exactly what he meant. I want someone to look into this properly, I said. Not just the transfers. All of it. Marcus nodded like he had been expecting me to say that. There's a woman I've worked with before, he said. Renee Okafor. She used to investigate financial fraud for a regional bank before she went independent. She's thorough, and she's quiet about it. I met Renee 3 days later in a small conference room at Marcus' office. She was maybe 45, sharp-eyed, with a laptop and a legal pad, and none of the drama I half expected from someone in her line of work. She asked for access to our joint accounts, which I could authorize as a co-owner. And she asked me a question that stuck with me longer than I expected. Has your wife ever managed money on her own before, without you involved? I told her yes. Lacey had gotten us out of debt years earlier through nothing but discipline and a spreadsheet. Renee wrote that down. Then that's not someone acting out of ignorance, she said. That's someone acting on purpose. I want you to remember that distinction as we go through this. I did not like hearing it stated so plainly, but I remembered it anyway. A week passed before Renee called with anything solid.
In that week, life continued in a way that felt almost dishonest in its normalcy. Ethan had a baseball game on Tuesday, and I sat in the bleachers next to Lacey, and she laughed at something the coach said. And for an hour, I nearly forgot what was sitting in that account. Sophie asked for help with a history project. I helped her build a timeline of the civil rights movement on a poster board at our kitchen table, the same table where I had once found a transfer that made my stomach drop. On Thursday, my phone rang while I was closing up the shop. It was Lacey's sister, Grace, calling from Dallas. Grace and I had always gotten along, mostly because she said whatever she was thinking and never pretended otherwise. I just talked to Lacey, Grace said. She sounds different lately. Happier, I guess. That new yoga studio must really be doing something for her. I asked how long she'd been going. Since around January, I think, Grace said. She mentioned some guy who teaches a class there. Owen something. Apparently he's got everyone convinced he can fix their finances and their downward dog at the same time. I stood very still in the doorway of my own shop, holding the phone, doing the math in my head. January, 7 months. The exact timeline of the transfers Renee had found. I told Grace that sounded nice and got off the phone as quickly as I could, without raising suspicion. That night, I could not stop turning the timeline over. January was when the transfers started. January was also, according to Grace, when this man named Owen had entered Lacey's life. Two things happening at the exact same time are rarely a coincidence. I had built precision machinery long enough to know that. Renee called 2 days later and asked me to come in.
She had a folder in front of her thicker than the one from our first meeting. I found your Owen Chandler, she said. I sat down across from her. He's not licensed to give investment advice in Oklahoma, she said. He was licensed once, in Kansas, about 6 years ago. That license was suspended after a formal complaint from a client. The details are sealed in the public record, but the suspension is real and it's on file. I asked what OC Capital Advisory actually was. As far as I can tell, she said, it's a name on a bank account. There's no registered investment firm under that name in any state database I've checked. No office address that isn't a mailbox rental. No employees besides him. I felt something cold settle into my chest. The kind of cold that replaces anger instead of feeding it. Hair is what concerns me more, Renee said. She turned her laptop toward me. I found a name that surprised me when I was tracing his business history. 7 years ago, Owen Chandler was a client of a supplier your shop used before you switched vendors. A company called Redline Fabrication out of Wichita. I remembered Redline. We had used them for raw steel stock for almost 2 years before their prices climbed too high, and I moved the account elsewhere. I had never met Owen Chandler in my life, but somewhere in the paperwork of my own business, years before any of this started, his name had already crossed paths with mine, without either of us knowing it. It's probably nothing more than a strange coincidence, Renee said. But I don't like coincidences in cases like this. I like to know where they come from. I did not know what to do with that information yet. It sat in my chest, like a stone I could not put down. There was something else, Renee said, and her voice shifted into a register I recognized from doctors right before they tell you something you do not want to hear. I went back through your account activity more carefully. There's a withdrawal from 3 months ago I don't think you've seen. She slid a printed page across the table. $15,000 pulled from a savings account earmarked. according to the account nickname Lacey had set up years earlier for Sophie's college fund. I stared at the page for a long moment. She moved money out of Sophie's account, I said, mostly to hear myself say it out loud. It was transferred into the same investment account as the other funds, Renee said. Based on the timing, it looks like it went into OC Capital Advisory as well. I thought about Sophie at the kitchen table 3 nights earlier, carefully cutting out pictures for her history project, completely unaware that a piece of her future had already been spent on a promise from a man she had never met. That was the moment something shifted for me. Up until then, I had been angry about money. Now, I was angry about something that went deeper than money, and I did not trust myself to speak to Lacey that night. I did not confront her. I went home, ate dinner with my family, listened to Ethan describe every play from his baseball game in exhausting detail, and watched Lacey laugh at something on her phone before turning it face down on the counter, the way she had started doing more often than I used to notice. 2 nights later, Sophie found me in the garage. I was under the truck, working on a stubborn bolt that had rusted itself into place, and she stood in the doorway for a while before saying anything. "Dad, can I show you something?" I slid out from under the truck. She was holding the family iPad, the one we kept in the kitchen for recipes and school schedules and homework research. Her face had the particular tightness of a 16-year-old who has decided to say something she is not sure she should say. "I wasn't trying to look at anything," she said. "It was just open on the counter, and there was a message on the screen, and I saw it before I could look away." She handed me the tablet. There was a text conversation still open in a messaging app, one I did not recognize Lacey using before. I will not repeat every word of what I read that night. I do not think it matters what the exact sentences were. What mattered was the tone, familiar in a way that had nothing to do with investment returns or portfolio performance. What mattered was the name at the top of the thread. Owen. I set the iPad down on the workbench very carefully. The way you set down something you are afraid you might throw otherwise. "Are you and Mom okay?" Sophie asked. Her voice was smaller than I had heard it in years. "They were figuring some things out," I told her, which was the truest thing I could manage without lying to her outright. I asked her not to mention it to her mother, not yet, and not to say anything to her brother. She nodded, and I watched something in her face harden slightly. The particular kind of growing up that happens when a child realizes their parents are not as solid as they believed. After she went back inside, I stood alone in the garage for a long time. I want to be honest about something, because I have never been interested in telling this story as though I did nothing wrong. Somewhere in that hour, standing next to a half-rebuilt engine with my daughter's words still hanging in the air, I thought about the past 3 years. I thought about how many nights I had come home late from the shop, how many weekends I had spent chasing new contracts instead of sitting across from my wife at dinner. I thought about a conversation we'd had almost a year earlier, when Lacey told me quietly that she felt like she was raising 2 teenagers and 1 absent husband. I remembered brushing it off, telling her I was doing all of this for the family, promising things would slow down once the Houston contract was finished. I do not say any of this to excuse what she had done. What she chose to do with Owen Chandler and with our money was hers to own, fully and without asking me to carry half of it for her. But I would be lying to you if I said I walked into the next few weeks believing I was blameless and how far apart we had drifted before any of this started. A marriage does not break because one person makes a decision in a vacuum. It breaks because 2 people stop paying attention to the same things at the same time. The following evening, I decided to test something. I did not mention Owen. I did not mention Sophie or the message on the iPad. I only asked Lacey, as calmly as I could manage, to tell me more about the investment account and how it was performing. She brightened immediately, the way people do when they think a difficult conversation has turned into an easy one. "It's actually doing really well," she said. For Owen said, "We're already up almost 12% since January." I asked her how much was in the account now. Total. She hesitated for just a beat too long. "Somewhere around 90,000, she said. I am rounding. I already knew the real number from Renee's report was closer to 83,000, counting every transfer, including the one from Sophie's fund. Close enough that I could not call it a lie outright. Far enough that I understood she was still managing what I was allowed to see.
I asked if Sophie's college fund was part of that 90,000. Something crossed her face, quick and controlled. "I moved a little from that account," she said. "Just temporarily. It'll be back before she needs it for tuition, with more growth than a regular savings account could ever give her." I was going to tell you once I saw the returns holding steady. I told her that sounded like a big decision to make without me. "I know," she said. "I should have talked to you first, but you're always so cautious with money." Daniel, and I didn't want you to say no before giving it a real chance. I did not push further that night. I told her I appreciated her being honest with me, which was not entirely a lie, because at least part of what she had told me was true. I simply did not tell her how much more I already knew than what she had chosen to share.
Renee called again 9 days later, and this time there was urgency in her voice that had not been there before. "I have been monitoring the account activity," she said. "There's a large pending transaction. It looks like Owen Chandler is preparing to withdraw the bulk of the funds within the next 2 weeks, close to $70,000, moving it out of the account entirely." "Where is it going?" I asked. "That's the part I can't fully trace yet," she said. "But I found something else you should know." I pulled flight records under his name through a source I use for these situations. He has a one-way ticket booked out of Tulsa, departing in 15 days. 15 days. I did the math without meaning to. That put his departure exactly 1 day before Ethan's baseball championship game, an event Lacey had circled on our family calendar in red ink back in the spring, the kind of day our whole family had already promised to be together for. It also put it 1 day after the large withdrawal was scheduled to clear. I sat with the folder open in front of me for a long time after Renee left the room. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, this had stopped being a story about a declined credit card. It had become a countdown. And for the first time since that morning at the airport, I understood that whatever I decided to do next, I would have to decide it soon. Before Owen Chandler boarded that flight with $70,000 of my family's money, and whatever was left of the life I thought I understood. Before Ethan stepped up to the plate in a stadium full of families who still believed theirs was as ordinary as it looked from the outside. Before I lost the chance to choose how this ended, instead of simply finding out after it already had. The morning after Renee told me about the flight, I sat in Marcus' office watching the clock on his wall move past 9, then 9:30, while he made 2 calls I was not part of. When he hung up the second time, he looked at me the way a man looks at another man right before telling him the easy part of the plan is over. "We can freeze the joint investment activity," he said. "As a co-owner on that original savings account, you have the legal standing to request it. The bank can hold any outgoing transfer from funds that originated in your joint accounts, pending review." I asked how fast that could happen. "Today," he said. "If you're ready." I told him I was. We drove to the bank together that afternoon. Susan Reyes, the branch manager who had known me since I opened my very first business account 15 years earlier, pulled up our records without a single question about why. She had that particular calm that people develop after seeing enough families walk through her door mid-crisis to know that calm was the only useful thing she could offer. "I am placing a hold on any transfer originating from these 3 accounts," she said, typing as she spoke. "Anything outbound over $500 will require both signatures going forward." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "We also need a full history on any sub-accounts opened under either name in the last 12 months. Suzanne's fingers paused over the keyboard for a moment longer than felt normal. "There's one I want to flag," she said. "Opened 4 months ago. A savings account, funded initially with $12,000 pulled from your primary joint account. The account is titled in Lacey's name only." I felt something shift low in my stomach, a version of the same feeling it had standing in that airport line months earlier, except colder this time, because I understood exactly what it meant. "I never authorized that," I said. "You didn't need to," Susan said gently. "Your wife had sole authority to open individual accounts using funds she had legal access to as a joint holder. It's not fraud. It's simply something she never told you about." Marcus wrote something on his legal pad and underlined it twice. This was not one of the transfers Renee had traced to Owen's company. This was separate. A door Lacey had quietly built for herself, months before any of the rest of this started, that had nothing to do with an investment advisor and everything to do with an exit she had never mentioned wanting. I did not say anything for a long moment. I thought about the conversation we'd had a year earlier, the one where she told me she felt like she was raising 2 teenagers and 1 absent husband. I had assumed that conversation ended when I promised things would slow down. I understood now it had not ended. It had simply gone quiet. And while it stayed quiet, she had started building something of her own on the side. $12,000 at a time. Long before Owen Chandler ever taught a yoga class. "I want to talk to her," I told Marcus that evening. "Not an ambush. Not a dinner with an audience. Just her, me, and you in the room so nothing gets denied later that shouldn't be." Marcus agreed, though he suggested we wait 3 more days, long enough for the account freeze to fully process, and for Renee to finish one last piece of the timeline she was still confirming.
I did not sleep well during those 3 days. I went through the motions of an ordinary week. I coached Ethan through batting practice in the backyard. I sat with Sophie while she finished her history project. The poster board now covered in photographs and dates that felt almost gentle compared to the timeline I was building in my own head. I watched Lacey move through the house with the same rhythm she always had, unaware that the ground beneath her had already shifted. On the third evening, I asked her to sit down at the kitchen table. Marcus was already there when she walked in, and I watched her face change the instant she saw him. "What is this?" she asked. "Sit down, Lacey," I said. "Please." She sat. Her eyes moved between Marcus and me, and I watched her arrange her expression into something careful, something that had clearly worked for her before, in smaller disagreements.
"I know about Owen," I said. I did not build up to it. I did not soften it with a question first. I had spent 3 weeks being patient, gathering, waiting, and I no longer wanted to spend one more evening pretending I did not know what I knew. Her face did not collapse the way I half expected. It went very still instead. The particular stillness of someone doing rapid math behind their eyes, trying to figure out how much I actually knew versus how much I might only suspect. "Daniel," she started. "I know about the 7 months of transfers," I said. "I know about the account he opened under a company that doesn't legally exist in this state. I know he lost his license in Kansas 6 years ago after a client complaint. I know about the $15,000 you pulled from Safi's college fund. And I know about the account you opened 4 months ago, in your name only, funded with $12,000 you never mentioned to me."
Every sentence landed like another piece being set down on the table between us, and I watched something in her shoulders drop with each one. The posture of a person who understands the story they've been telling themselves privately no longer matches the one being read back to them. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its careful edge. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough to stop believing you were going to tell me on your own," I said. She looked down at her hands. "It started as financial advice," she said. That part was true, at least at first. He was charming, and he talked about money in a way that made me feel smart instead of stupid, which is not how you've ever made me feel, even when you didn't mean anything by it. And then it became something else. Slowly. In a way I told myself I could stop at any point.
I never planned for it to become what it became. I asked her about the $12,000. Her jaw tightened. "That was mine," she said. "The money I was setting aside in case I needed it. In case I needed to leave." "Leave me?" I asked. "Leave this," she said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. At the house, at 18 years compressed into one motion of her hand. I felt invisible in this marriage. Daniel. I felt like I was managing a household for a man who was building an empire somewhere else and coming home to sleep in it. I am not saying that excuses what I did. I am saying I did not wake up one day and decide to destroy something. I drifted into it, one small decision at a time, the same way you apparently found out about it. A piece at a time. Marcus, who had been silent until then, spoke carefully. "Lacey," he said, "I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters going forward. What you're describing about feeling unseen in your marriage may be entirely real, and it may be something the two of you need to work through separately from everything else we're discussing tonight. But moving your daughter's college fund into an unlicensed account managed by a man with a documented history of financial misconduct is not a symptom of an unhappy marriage. It's a decision with legal weight of its own." Lacey's eyes filled, and for the first time that evening, I saw something that looked less like calculation and more like a person finally hearing, out loud, the size of what she had done. "I know," she said quietly. "I know that now." I asked her if she loved him. She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she said. "I think I loved feeling chosen. I don't know if that's the same thing." We sat with that answer for a while, none of us rushing to fill the silence. 3 days later, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Daniel," the voice said. "It's Owen." I did not say anything for a moment, letting the silence stretch the way Marcus had taught me to let silences stretch, because people tend to fill them with more than they intend to. "I think we should talk," he said, man to man. "I understand you've frozen the accounts." I asked him what exactly he wanted to talk about. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said. "The investment strategy is legitimate. I can walk you through the returns myself if you give me the chance. I never meant for any of this to hurt your family." I told him I already knew he wasn't licensed to manage investments in this state, and that I had a full record of every transfer going back 7 months, including the one from my daughter's college fund. There was a pause on the line, longer than the ones Lacey had given me on the phone weeks earlier. "Look," he said, his voice shifting into something quieter, almost tired. "I've made mistakes. I am not going to pretend I haven't. But I am not the villain you think I am. I was trying to build something that would actually help Lacey feel secure, because from what she told me, she wasn't getting that at home." I felt anger rise in me for the first time in weeks, not the hot kind, but something harder and more focused. I told him I did not call him to discuss my marriage. I told him I wanted the exact location of every dollar that had left our accounts, and that if it was not returned in full, he would be dealing with more than an angry husband. There was a long pause. Then he said something I had not expected. "You're not the first person to say that to me." I asked him what he meant. He hesitated, then said, almost like a confession slipping out before he could stop it, "There was a situation in Wichita a few years back. It's a woman I worked with. It didn't end well. I learned from it. I thought I was being more careful this time." I told him I would be in touch through my attorney, and I ended the call. I called Renee immediately. Within 2 days, she had confirmed what Owen had let slip. A woman in Wichita named Carol Ann Whitfield had filed a formal complaint against Owen Chandler 4 years earlier, alleging he had convinced her to move retirement funds into an account he controlled, funds she never fully recovered. The complaint was part of what had led to his license suspension in Kansas. He had simply moved states and started again under a new name for his business, choosing his targets more carefully the second time. I want to be honest about what I felt reading that report. I did not feel triumphant. I felt sick, thinking about how close my own daughter's tuition money had come to disappearing the same way Carol Ann Whitfield's retirement funds had. Marcus and I discussed options for several days. There was a temptation, I will admit, to go after Owen with everything I had, to make him pay in every way the law would allow. Marcus talked me through what that would actually mean. A criminal case would be difficult to build quickly, since much of what he had done sat in a gray area between poor judgment and outright fraud, at least on my family's transactions alone. What we could do, clearly and effectively, was report him to the state's Financial Regulatory Board, provide them with Renee's full documentation, and support Carol Ann Whitfield if she chose to pursue a civil case with the evidence we now had connecting his pattern across 2 states. I chose that path, not because I wanted to protect Owen Chandler from consequences, but because I wanted the consequences to come from something larger and more permanent than my own anger. A regulatory board revoking whatever remained of his ability to manage other people's money would matter more, in the long run, than anything I could do to him personally. Within 6 weeks, the board opened a formal investigation. Owen's remaining registration was suspended pending review, and Carol Ann Whitfield, once she learned she was not the only one, agreed to move forward with her own civil claim, with Renee's documentation supporting hers as well as mine. $71,000 of the money moved into that account was eventually recovered through the freeze and the bank's fraud department, everything except a portion Owen had already spent before we caught the pattern. It was not everything. It was enough that Sophie's college fund was made whole again, dollar for dollar, before she ever had to know how close it had come to not being there. The harder accounting happened at home. Lacey and I spent the following weeks in a kind of careful, exhausting honesty neither of us had practiced much in years. We sat down with a marriage counselor Marcus recommended, a woman named Dr. Patricia Nwosu, who spent our first session mostly listening, and our second session asking a question that stayed with me longer than almost anything else that year. "Can you both tell me the moment you stopped choosing each other, before any of this happened?" she asked. "Not the moment you found out. The moment before that, when the distance started." Lacey answered first. "The night I told him I felt invisible, and he told me things would slow down, and then they didn't," she said. I thought about it for a long moment before I answered. The night she told me that. And I heard her. And I still chose the Houston contract over changing anything. I said, I heard her and I did not actually change. Neither answer excused what came after. Dr. Nwosu was careful to make that clear in nearly every session. What had happened with Owen Chandler and our savings was Lacey's decision, made and carried out by her alone, and no amount of loneliness in a marriage obligates anyone to make the choices she made. But understanding where the distance started did something neither of us expected. It let us talk to each other instead of only at each other. We told Sophie and Ethan the truth in pieces appropriate to their ages, enough that they understood their parents were working through something serious, not enough to burden them with details that belonged to us. Sophie, who had already carried the weight of that message on the iPad for weeks, seemed almost relieved to have it finally acknowledged out loud, even if the acknowledgement did not come with an easy resolution. Grace called Lacey every few days that fall, and though I was not part of those conversations, I could tell from Lacey's face afterward that her sister was not making things easy on her, and that Lacey, for once, was not asking her to. By early November, Lacey and I made a decision neither of us arrived at quickly. We would separate for a defined period, 6 months, living apart while continuing counseling together, before deciding anything permanent about the marriage. It was not the ending either of us had imagined for ourselves 18 years earlier. It was also not the ending I might have chosen in anger 3 months before, the kind that closes every door at once. Marcus helped structure it carefully, with clear financial boundaries this time, transparent accounts, no more silent decisions made on either side. Ethan's championship game happened on schedule. The same weekend Owen Chandler had once planned to board a one-way flight out of Tulsa with money that was never his to TKE. Lacey and I sat together in the stands that day, not as a couple pretending nothing had happened, but as two parents who had agreed that whatever else changed between us, this would not. Ethan hit a double in the 4th inning, and I watched him round second base, grinning like the outcome of the entire season depended on it, and for a moment none of the rest of it mattered at all.
A few weeks later, I stood in line at the same Tulsa airport where all of this had started, catching a flight to finalize another contract. This one smaller, closer to home, the kind I had started choosing more often since that fall. I handed my card to the agent for a seat upgrade I did not particularly need, but wanted anyway. She swiped it once. It went through without a sound, without a second glance, without anyone behind me checking their watch. I thought about how much had changed since the last time I stood in a line like this one. Not just the money, though every dollar had eventually been accounted for. Something quieter than that. I no longer needed a working credit card to feel like I understood my own life. I understood it because I had finally taken it apart, piece by piece, the way I would any engine that stopped running the way it should. And I had looked directly at every part I did not want to see.
Lacey and I are still 6 months into that agreement as I tell you this. I do not know yet whether we will find our way back to each other or whether this season is simply the slow, respectful end of something that already ended months before either of us admitted it out loud. What I know is that my children are safe, that the money meant for their future is exactly where it belongs, and that a man who built a career out of other people's trust is no longer able to do it quietly in the dark. I think about my father's old truck sometimes, still sitting half-finished in that garage. I have not touched it in months. Some machines, it turns out, are easier to understand than the people you love. But I am learning, slowly, that the ones worth fixing are usually the ones that take the longest. If you were in my position, would you have chosen to fight for the marriage the way I did? Or would you have walked away the moment you learned the truth? I would honestly like to know what you think. If this story stayed with you, tell me what you would have done in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Revenge with Jack. There's always another story waiting.